Welcome to Less Clutter, More You, a podcast that travels with you through the journey of letting go and creating order so you can start making more room for what matters most. Together, we'll go beyond the basket to start unlocking your next level of embracing your physical and mental space through mindset shifts and action steps. I'm your host, Maggie Britton, professional organizer, clutter coach, wife, and mom of four, and I am so glad you are here. Welcome back. We have Tyler Moore, who is the Tidy Dad. You may have seen him creep into your social media feed at some point or another. Once you're in his orbit, it is a perfect reminder that we can do life simply, we can do life with less, and we can do life with what matters most. And so that is exactly what drew me into connecting with Tyler and bringing him on here to talk with you, to remind you that you're not alone if you are in a small space, if you have a busy life. And we're going to take it from there and talk about routines and living in, the city and what that looks like in terms of preventing clutter, staying on top of clutter. I know you are living in your New York City apartment with your wife and 3 daughters. Can you tell us how the Tidy Dad came to be?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Maggie. It's so nice to be here. And I feel like this time of year, it's summertime in New York City. We're still navigating the end of the school year. So we're sort of in the thick of it. So I hope that from being in the thick of it, I'm able to give some tips and strategies and things that are working for us. But yeah, I'm a dad. I'm a father of 3 daughters. My oldest is 9. My middle is 7. My youngest daughter is 4. And we live in New York City. We live in a 750 square foot apartment. We lived in New York City for almost 15 years now. I was originally from Kentucky. And so it's so interesting, the life that we have. It's very different from the life of my sisters and from my parents. But yet, part of being Tidy Dad is it's really thinking about what we want from our life, the things that we like to do, our habits, our routines, the way we like to just sort of exist within our space. And I feel like for us, after we had our second daughter, that was the big time where we were trying to figure out, are we going to make life in New York City sustainable for our young family? Is this where we want to live? And I feel like many parents sort of have that reckoning. And so with our second daughter, that was when sort of Tidy Dad started. I had to sort of rev my engine a little bit. I've always been sort of an organized and tidy person. I'm also a teacher by day. I've been a teacher for over 15 years. I've taught grades 3rd all the way up to 7th. I'm currently a 7th grade math teacher. So as a teacher, I've had to be organized because I have to orchestrate the movement of 30 little bodies all around the classroom at one time. But when it came to organizing our space, there were some just logistical sort of challenges. And we had to really dig deep and say, is this where we want to live? Is this where we want to make our home? And if so, what needs to happen in order to make life sustainable in this small space able to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I get a lot of questions of, well, how do I let go? How do I identify what to keep and what not? And listening to you, it's clear that you, with the family, you recognize, that it's clear that's who you want to be spending your time with, right? That's where your energy wants to go. And all of the extras just pulls and limits what you're able to give and be present with your family, for your students. So, Tyler, could you just tell us one more time the square footage of your apartment?
Yeah, so it's 750 square feet. It's 2 bedrooms. It is a railroad style apartment, which is unique. So it's long and skinny. And so basically you walk in through the living room, the kitchen adjoins it, but then you have to walk through every other room to get to the subsequent rooms. So like you have to walk through the tiny playroom. We walk through the bedroom that my wife and I share. And then all 3 daughters are now in the largest bedroom of apartment that they all share. But I do feel like what you're talking about is a philosophy I talk about often, is this how I think it's important that everybody has this personal definition of what is just enough. Because when you have that really clear definition, that then helps with the process of decluttering. The idea is that with just enough, you want to be able to name in any given category what is the just enough amount of something that you need in order to thrive. And so for us, 750 square feet really is just enough
Mm-hmm.
for us during the school year. All three of my kids are out of the house the majority of the week, the same with me. But when we thought about what do we want our rhythms to be on the weekends, we live in New York City. You don't sit
Right.
in your apartment all weekend long. You go out and explore. And we want to go to Central Park. We want to go to shows. We want to go to museums. And so our definition of just enough for our square footage also matches what do we want from our time, our energy, our habits, our routines. And so I feel like there's power in aligning those two. And that then helps with, because we have decluttering sessions all the time. As you know, decluttering isn't a one and done
Mm-hmm.
thing. We have a calendar that we use, this like cyclical sort of calendar that it's like, okay, we know that it's October. It's like time to edit the winter gear because everyone in our buy nothing groups is looking for winter gear in October. But if you wait to declutter winter gear in like March, no one wants your coats. No one wants your gloves. So we've really had to think about what are our systems, what are our routines, how do they complement the rhythms that we want for our family? But it ultimately goes back to that definition of what is just enough for us in this current season. And then how do you drown out some of the noise of what everyone else thinks that you should have or should be doing, or how you should be spending your time? Like it really does come down to your individual definition and how you share that with the people that you live with.
Absolutely. And it looks so different for every individual, every family unit, wherever you are located, that's all going to look different. But I just want people to know that Tyler is sitting here and he's smiling and he lives in a 750 square foot, apartment. So when people
Yeah.
tell me I don't have the space, it's just, what are you choosing? Are you choosing space? Are you choosing stuff? And that really comes down to an internal decision that you have to
Yeah.
just, as you were saying, it's not a one and done. That is a process, and where you start might not be where you end. I want to go back to, you mentioned rhythms, which I love, that everything that just encompasses the word rhythm, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
people working together, and it's something that, with especially a family and a busy, active family and young kids, getting into the rhythm takes practice and takes
Hmm.
reminders and takes consistency and takes tweaking. I remember one video you shared, and it's like clockwork, right? You come home from school, everybody knows their routines, the habits that go into creating that rhythm, that daily routine.
Hmm.
So, can you talk about how, I know as a mother of four, it's almost a second job, right? Like third job, fourth
Yeah.
job,
Yeah.
of just
Yeah.
installing these values of habits and rhythms and how those really contribute to your daily success.
Yeah. Talking about rhythm, I like to think about an orchestra. So many ways as parents, or even if you're a single parent or living alone, caring for an aging parent, regardless of life stage, like you are sort of that orchestra leader and you're the conductor. There are moments where everything seems to be harmoniously working together, but then there can be that like cacophony, or you feel like a cymbal has just dropped, or like someone has lost like the drumstick and it's gone, or somebody's playing a note that's out of tune. And so it's really being attuned, I think, to the season of life that you're in and leaning into those rhythms, because you can't fight against certain rhythms because you'll lose. So, like, for example, my early mornings, I used to wake up when the first daughter woke me up. And I've always had early risers. Even my 9-year-old is still up in the fives every single
Oh,
day.
Tyler.
And so it was, I know. So I was like, okay, I can't change them, people are like, well, why don't you just have your kids go to bed later? And I'm like, I tried that. You know what? They woke up even earlier.
Right.
I was like, we have tried things, but I think that this is sort of ingrained right now. So like, I'm just leaning into it. So I then realized that I didn't like being woken up by my child. So what did I have to do? I had to set my alarm to go off before her. And so even when she was like 3 years old, I was setting my alarm to go off at 4:30 so that I could at least walk out of the bedroom, have started my coffee, have a few moments of quiet time before then she sauntered out and found me. And I found that I was a much better parent and then I was a much better teacher when I at least had that little bit of quiet time in the morning. But like the after school routine, we call it like the great bedtime shuffle. The great bedtime shuffle, still to this day, with all three girls, lasts about 2 hours. It's from like 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And within that period of time, there's preparing dinner, there's eating dinner, there's cleaning up after dinner, there's then making sure that everyone is clean. Then there's the like, let's tidy and let's put things away. Let's then read books or do something as a family before we all go to bed. And then everybody in bed by 7 to this day, and I know that I'm going to have to push the bedtime later, but like I need all three of them in bed at 7 o'clock. And our oldest, they share a triple bunk, and she's like, all my friends stay up till 8:30 or 9, and I'm like, that's fine. If you want to lay in bed and read, do it. But I can't have any children walking around my house past 7 o'clock. I'm like, I've been with you all day. I've gotten you to school. I've been with my own students all day long. So often when we see routines break down, it's often because the kids don't know fully how to do it, or we have set expectations for them or for other people, and we haven't articulated those expectations. But my oldest is like, you don't need to remind me now. I know exactly what to do. But I'm like, okay, tell me back the steps,
Absolutely.
which is different from my 4-year-old that still needs me to walk through all of the steps with her. I feel like oftentimes we forget that there is so much teaching that goes into each of these routines. You can't just say to your kid, go take a shower,
Absolutely.
or go put on your shoes, it's time to leave. There are so many steps that make up that routine, which goes to your point around it feels like a full-time job. And it
Right.
is. And it's a job that my wife and I share. Like we share the responsibilities of teaching these things to our daughters to then hopefully transfer the responsibility to them, because then there's that next stage of life that comes and a whole new set of skills that you have to teach.
The task may not be complicated, but you have to know that that is a step within that routine, right?
Yeah.
Even just saying it out loud, we do a back to school walkthrough because I like my kids to remember where their book bags should end up versus where they're more likely to end up in the kitchen, right? So just literally doing walkthroughs and lead by example and just those reminders. And then there's also something I want to go back, and you were talking about changing your wake up time to accommodate what the real life situation was. Sometimes I hear people struggling and they're saying, well, I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do this. But what's important is shifting that mindset to what can I do? What is something
Mm-hmm.
I personally can change to make this entire rhythm flow and just move that much more smoothly? So if you are thinking in your head, well, what Tyler's saying, I couldn't do that because of this. I have this roadblock. This is my situation. That might be true, but what can you do? One thing, what can you do? And that might mean getting up early, but it also just might mean having that conversation with the people that you are working through that orchestra rhythm with, right? What can you do to verbalize and talk about that routine so that everybody's at least on board, or at least is reminded as to the advantages? And so, Tyler, if you didn't have these routines, how do you think your day would go? Because in my online community and what I teach, the routines and habits are just as important as that initial decluttering, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if one
Mm-hmm.
thing's not working, it's likely that something else is off. And
Yeah.
many times it's the routines and the habits that you need to go back to and see what is that, what's not happening there. So, what do you think would happen if you didn't have those routines and daily habits?
I realized that I was able to handle physical exhaustion more so than like the mental and the emotional. And so what really started for me with waking up early was I borrowed a concept from my friend Patty Morrissey. So Patty Morrissey works in the US. She's the lead trainer for KonMari, which is Marie Kondo's sort of like group of professional organizers. And she has a principle that she talks about, which is this idea of a 30-day experiment. The idea is that you name something that you've always sort of wanted to try and you give yourself 30 days to experiment. And so that's how actually my early wake up started. I was like, okay, for the month of March, let me just try waking up a little bit earlier each day and see what the impact may be. And what Patty talks about is when you treat it like an experiment, it gives you a little bit more forgiveness when you notice things that are going well and then when things sort of aren't going well. The idea is that with habits and routines, you can explore it like a scientist would. The scientists start something with a hypothesis. And so my hypothesis was, will waking up earlier have a positive impact on my like mental and emotional energy during the day?
Love it.
It was just a wondering. And so then I went in and started experimenting and I started waking up a little bit earlier, which meant that I went to bed a little bit earlier. I noticed that by going to bed a little bit earlier, I actually sort of stopped the sort of like the scrolling or like the where we just stream shows. Like I wasn't doing anything productive at
Right.
night. So I was like, okay, let me shift to waking up a little bit earlier. But when you wake up early, it's not like you wake up early to then stream that show. I found that I was doing other things, like I wanted to read or journal or work out or do my like a little bit of cleaning. So the idea with the experiment is that I don't know, it gives yourself a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of grace just to try something out. And then at the end of the 30 days, you determine, do I want to keep it going or do I not want to? Because there is the classic debate of what is better, being the night owl or being the early bird. And all the early birds want to say, well, why don't you just wake up early? And the night owls are like, but I like being up late at night. It doesn't actually matter as long as the routines and the habits that you have in place are serving you in your current season. We learned very early on that, like, when we stayed up late, we gave ourselves a natural consequence the next morning because our children still woke up early.
Right.
So we had to learn, as much as it may feel great on that Friday night to stay up until 11 or 12 o'clock, if they're still getting up at 5 a.m. the next morning, then we're tired and exhausted all day long. So there is this negotiation that has to come. I think that oftentimes with routines, the issue is that everybody tries to do all of them at one time. And people don't recognize that like routines take a long
Mhm.
time in order to form into a habit. And when I say a long time, sometimes it's 6 weeks or longer before something starts to feel normal.
But as you said, like I love the experimenting because a lot of people are afraid to even get started because they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to fail or they don't want to not do it perfect. But by looking at it as an experiment, it is so much less pressure. So, with your smaller space and the routines now that you have in place, in terms of physical items, what are some things that maybe you have had to let go of in order to make the space for you and your family?
Yeah. So, one sort of big exercise that I had to complete was narrowing the physical amount of clothing that I had. I really had to pare down my like collection of the same 20 blue plaid shirts. Blue plaid shirts were really, I really loved them, but they didn't all fit in my hanging space, you know? And so I feel like I learned a lot about myself. And I think decluttering is always an opportunity to learn something about yourself. You really get to interrogate, why am I holding on to this? Or I think the more exciting thing is you get to interrogate why you really want to keep something. So I was like, why do you actually want to keep all of these items? What do you realize about yourself? And I realized, like, Tyler, you really love navy blue, and you really love olive, and you really love tan, and I'm noticing you have quite a bit of burgundy. Why don't you just build a capsule wardrobe that's all around those four core colors? And that one decision has eliminated so many other decisions that I've had to make. And so to this day, we're talking, I mean, this happened like 5 years ago. I still wear those four core colors.
Perfect.
Of course, I've updated things along the way, but those are my four core colors that bring me joy. It's my summer wardrobe, my winter wardrobe. All the things coordinate and go together.
There's a statistic about the number of decisions we make on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis that just fills our brains. But once you recognize and you stop and think, and this could be an experiment for anybody who's listening, maybe your experiment is starting to see how many decisions are you making throughout the day. And it doesn't matter if that decision is, am I going to have a bottled water or a cup of water? It could be the smallest decision, but they're all adding up and they're compounding on top of each other. So you can't see Tyler right now, but he's wearing a navy t-shirt. Okay. He simplified that decision because decision
Yeah.
fatigue is real and it pulls from your energy. And that is so much more of that energy that you could put towards other places. So it does, it simplifies that decision making process, which also then simplifies your routines and the rest of the
Totally.
rhythm of your day. So the less decisions, make that your first experiment. See how many decisions you can remove from your day.
And I feel like with a small space and any space, I do feel like there's always this idea of, do we evolve our space or do we trade spaces? And I feel like people universally are always wrestling with this. But what I found is that, it's an analogy I like to use, people are like hermit crabs. So hermit crabs, they live in one shell and then they grow. And once that one shell is too small, then they extract the shell and then they crawl and they find a new one. And it's this constant, like, let me get a bigger, a bigger, a bigger, a bigger, a bigger. And I do feel like society, largely in the US, has told us the exact same thing, that the idea is that we have our children, and then as our children get older and get bigger, we then have to inherently make our spaces bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But then, as so many people have told me on Instagram, they'll DM me and they'll say, then all of my children left. They're like, now I'm stuck with 3,000 square feet, all of these bedrooms, all of this stuff. And they're like, my kids don't want any of it. And so now I'm left dealing with all of this stuff that has compounded.
Yes.
So they're like, I guess we could have just made decluttering a regular rhythm,
Right.
been okay with our space, that then it may have prevented some of these other sort of headaches we're experiencing later. I think that every family has to make, the joy about life is that everybody gets to make choices. For some people, a larger home works for them. For other people, a smaller home works for them. But I feel like it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, is when your home, when your space aligns with your personal definition of what is just enough, when it aligns with how you want to spend your time, how you want to allocate your resources, how you want to spend your weekend. I know people who look forward to mowing their yard for like 5 hours on a weekend. To me, I do not look forward to that. I look forward to going to Central Park and playing for 5 hours. But again, it's not to knock the one person over another. It's different choices
Absolutely.
and different priorities that people have. And there's freedom in naming what is actually just enough for you, and then putting those other decisions into place in alignment with that definition.
And it takes work to identify what is just enough. But if you are listening and you're saying, I need to move, because we've worked with people who are both saying, we're looking for a bigger house.
Mm-hmm.
And then we come in and all of a sudden they have found space where there was not space before. And you start to look at where you already are living and find that that actually may be just enough. You just need to uncover it. And then we also have people who are calling, like you said, that now they have all this space and they have all this space filled with things right? And now that's preventing them from going into that next stage of life where they are empty nesters and they are up against the clutter, just this physical items in their home, and they have to release that so that they can go out and explore and do whatever it is that the next season of life is. So before we go, Tyler, besides some of your wardrobe, and so that was more of like a physical item, is there anything beyond that that you felt you had to let go of in order to really embrace the lifestyle of living in a small New York City apartment?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're constantly sort of like juggling with is, especially in this new season of life, is, there are times when we would like to host friends or have in our house play dates with the girls and their friends, when we would love to be able to host a big family gathering at the holidays, or have the grandparents come visit us here comfortably. We've really had to think about sort of how we use our space, how we also think about our cottage in Pennsylvania and what that looks like for our family rhythms, because it is different. There are times when we would love to have our 3 friends over with their kids. I see people who have their big backyard barbecues or their friends givings. And there are times when we're like, oh, this space just isn't really conducive to that. And that's been hard at times. As our girls get older, it's always interesting because whenever we leave New York City, they're like, why do kids sleep in separate bedrooms? They're cousins. They're like, but they each have their own bedroom with a bathroom on it. That would be really nice because it gets really hard when we all need to use the bathroom at the same time. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And to my oldest, I've asked her questions that I'm like, do you know what type of space you want to live in someday? And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, your mommy and I, we chose a space very different from where we grew up. We grew up in a house, we had a basement, we had our own bedrooms. But when we became adults, we chose an apartment. And, there are all the reasons why. And she was like, well, what I really want to do is I want to live in a place that still lets me travel and go on adventures because I like that we get to do that.
Amazing.
And I was like, okay, I feel like as parents, you don't get everything right. But I was like, I at least appreciated her articulating it in that way because she's starting to connect that where we live has an impact on the lifestyle that we want to have. And so for her to start to think of oh, choosing one thing may mean that something else could happen. That was a really powerful conversation that we had. And I was like, okay, that makes me feel good, as a parent.
Totally spot on. And like you said, it's something that you were living, but then to have your child recognize what you were giving up, but why.
Yeah.
That's just heartwarming in itself. So thank you, Tyler, for sharing this. I look forward to having more conversations with you as the Tidy Dad evolves and more people find you. So Instagram is at Tidy Dad, but then you can find him on thetidydad.com if you're looking for any of his resources. But happy Father's Day, Tyler, because it is well-deserved. And I hope that anyone's listening, share this with a father that you know, because sharing these responsibilities that so often fall on the mother is really admirable on your part, and people can learn from you, both the mothers and the fathers and the grandparents and the aunts and anybody can learn from you in terms of how routines really contribute to the flow and the rhythm of your day, and how sometimes living with less is actually more. So thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for listening, and we will chat soon. Thank you for tuning in. If after listening you have gained just a boost of motivation to start thinking about your clutter, and taking action to clear it, then I would love for you to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode and leave a rating and review so we can continue to grow and inspire others just like you. In the meantime, I'll be here cheering you on your next step forward with living with less clutter and more you.